It's time for Pure Performance.
Get your stopwatches ready. It's time for Pure Performance with Andy Grabner and Brian Wilson. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Pure Performance. My name is Brian Wilson, and as always, I have with me my fantastic co-host, Andy Grabner. Andy, how are you doing today? I need a thesaurus, Andy. I can't come up with good alternate descriptions for you. Fantastic, wonderful, lovely.
I'm good with those, right?
Despicable.
I mean, if they're accurate, that's all good, unless you fake it. But yeah. I think I'm wonderful. I'm looking forward to tomorrow, though, because tomorrow is my last day of traveling for a while, and it's been a lot of traveling in the last couple of weeks. And as much as I love going back to travel, I also love coming back home, because in the last couple of weeks traveling by train, which was mostly what I've done, wasn't as convenient as it used to be, because I think we in Europe here, we have a lot of challenges with trains these days and with flights and with everything. Yeah. So let's say that way.
You're in a blue room today. Where are you?
Stuttgart, Germany. I'm in Stuttgart, Germany. Yeah. And it's actually funny because Stuttgart is the home of Mercedes-Benz. But then I'm sitting here next to I think one of the largest infrastructure projects in Germany, which is renewing the whole train station, like the main train station, the whole area around it. It will be great when it's done. Until it's done, it still takes some time. But I want to do one more thing here, kind of as a segue. In the last couple of weeks, I really had a lot of bad delays with flights and also trains, which means they did not meet their SLOs. Because for me, a great SLO, a service level objective, would be that trains are on time 99.99% of the time.
Especially in Germany.
Especially in Germany, exactly. But, talking about SLOs, we have a guest today who at least I have known for a couple of years now. And he is, I think, as big as an advocate for site reliability engineering and SLOs as I would like to be. But I don't want to introduce him to the audience. I want to give him the chance to introduce himself. Stephen, how are you? Who are you? Welcome to the show.
Hi, Andy. Thank you. Yes, my name is Stephen Townshend. I am technically a site reliability engineer. That's my title. I'm part of an enablement team within IAG, which is an insurance company in Australasia. And I actually met you, Andy, through performance engineering, which I did for 13 years before that. And I talk a lot online and share my learning journey, because it was a bit of a shock going from performance engineering, when I felt like I knew what I was doing, to SRE, where I felt like a complete beginner. And I thought, I can't pretend to know what I don't know, but I can say, hey, I don't know anything. Come learn with me. So that's what I've been trying to do.
Yeah. Well, welcome to the club, because both Brian and I think we were seasoned performance engineers in our career. And then we started the whole journey towards observability. And then we started the podcast. And now we try to be smart on what we're talking, but basically we don't have a whole lot of clue about. No, I don't want to.
Right. We bring smart. But I think we bring smart guests on the show to make us seem smart. And then we learn from them. So you're our smart guest that we're going to learn from.
I was going to say, when's the smart guest showing up?
Hey, but Stephen, we will obviously make sure that people know how to get a hold of you to see what type of content you actually produce. And one of the things that you are doing is you have a YouTube channel. It's called Site Reliability. Right? And I think you're doing, regular shows, or at least it feels like, at least once a week, things are coming out. What motivated you to do this?
I did have it's actually a podcast. So although there's a YouTube channel, and it's also available on most podcast platforms as well. And when I was in performance engineering, I actually had one called Performance Time, and I basically rebranded it. I thought, let's change it to make it SRE focused. And like I said, the motivation changed. With Performance Time, I really wanted to provide more of an educational resource, but also show what I wasn't seeing a lot in the technology industry, which is sort of empathy and humanity, and just talking about the human beings who do this really complicated work and how they get through it and how they problem solve and their creativity. So that's what that original intent was. And I've tried to carry some of that through. But like I said, the focus now is also on just having this honest conversation of, I have no idea what's going on. Let's try and make sense of it.
Mm-hmm. And then so first of all, folks, if you're listening, we will link to all of the content that Stephen is producing. But the reason why we're now actually on the call, we should have had you on the call, on the podcast a long time ago, but there was a LinkedIn posting, and I am just looking at it. It was our friend Scott Moore posting a blog post from Dynatrace talking about 7 steps to identify and implement efficient or effective service level objectives. And then you made a comment that, possibly controversial, but I think that if your organizational team does not value reliability for any number of reasons, then I don't think defining SLOs or SLIs should be the priority. And then it was going on back and forth between you and also one of our colleagues, Safe, and then I chimed in. And I thought this went into a really interesting discussion, because you basically said, that there's don't put the pressure on people and kind of force SLOs on them without, I think, good ownership and and actually changing also the people, the culture, and the processes. And I think this kind of reminded me that every time when I talk with organizations and I kind of try to educate them on the value of SLOs, I kind of feel, sometimes silently, but I kind of sense it, that people like the concept, but then they also say, we don't know how this works. How should this work in our organization? Because we have so many other things to do, and then we got always the pressure of delivering more features. And how can we deliver more features, and yet we should have better reliability and better performance? And so I would like to kind of give you now a little bit of airtime and say, what is your perspective? What do you see out in your organization and the organizations that you've talked and worked with in the past about telling them about SLOs, but where are the problems actually really implementing SLOs?
So I'll speak about IAG, where I currently work. It's a reasonably large company for Australasia, 13,500 staff, big history. It's sort of built out through acquiring other smaller companies and becoming one giant company. So imagine all the different technologies, different cultures, different teams, and people coming together. It's got a lot going on. And so that's kind of the context. When we first formed this SLO enablement team, we had a team come to us immediately and say, we want to do SLOs. And we're like, great. And they said, you're the experts, right? And we said, yeah. And then we went away and quickly tried to read and learn as much as possible. And we just started experimenting with them. And we created this interactive workshop where we would talk about their customers and their key services, and then we identified, what they wanted to achieve and come up with indicators and then actual threshold or objectives as well. And conversations were great, but at the end of it, what we came up with just what didn't feel connected to anything real. It just didn't seem to be enough. And I understand that part of SLO, it's not just about coming up with a number. It's about the way you adjust your culture and mindset around operations and what you actually do. You alert on different things. You focus on different things because it's about, can the customers use the service, not technical stuff. But it just wasn't quite working. And we tried that with the second team. And again, the same kind of thing happened. And that's when we had that alternative. We pivoted and said, look, what are we trying to achieve here? What is it we're trying to achieve with SLOs? Because I guess it wasn't clear what the overall business objective was. And that's something I want to talk about later. So that's when we said, well, what's the goal? The goal is really, we think, to help teams understand their customers better. And when they make technology changes, how that impacts those customers. That was the first thing. And then in a wider sense, we thought our team goal really is to make the lives of our customers and our colleagues and team members easier through the lens of reliability. So that's what our team's about. How can we do that? And the SLO definition in the current context of the organization, it wasn't achieving that fast enough. And that's when I got thinking about, what? I think there might be prerequisites or things that will set you up for success with SLOs. And since those initial conversations, I've spoken more about it. I shared 6 different potential prerequisites with you. I've got another 3 here, which I haven't told you about yet. I'm really starting to think that there are a lot of things that at least some of them need to be in place, I think. Or at least if you have these things there, it's going to make your life a lot easier.
So in the very beginning, I need to ask you a quick question. In the very beginning, you said in your organization, you started forming the SLO enablement team. Why was this team established?
We had a pretty senior leader in the organization who had come from Groupon, I believe. And so he had seen SRE and different ways of working come to fruition and really provide a lot of value. And so he wanted an opportunity for IAG to explore that.
Uh-huh. Okay, because this was kind of like, for me, kind of the initial thing, because I also had a similar situation where an organization came to me and they said, hey, we're now doing SLOs. And I said, that's great, but why? Right? What was the motivation behind it? Oh, because I heard it from Google. That's not the right answer. And so I was just curious on your side. Now you said with the first and the second team, well, let's say focus on the first team where you tried it. You said you sat down, you defined the indicators, you defined SLOs, objectives. What were these and why didn't they work? Remember those?
I don't know if I can. I might better remember. So the first team was actually a team who runs a Kubernetes PaaS, and which other teams all over the company host their stuff on. Mm-hmm. And it's quite big and quite important to the company. And so there was this kind of unusual context because we had to talk to them and say, who are your customers? And they were thinking about the end customer. And I was saying, well, actually, the customers you have control over are the other teams at IAG. So that was a mindset shift. And so one of the SLOs we came up with was around the successive deployments or rebuilds or something, because it's really about the stability of that platform and making sure that people can update their code when they need to. Which they were, it was a bit of surprise there. It wasn't about the end customer and like latency and those kinds of metrics. So that was one of them.
Because essentially that team is like, it's like if I would now build an app, I would probably go to Amazon or Google or Microsoft and basically, use their services so they have a certain SLA with me. And like in your case, that platform team is kind of like a SaaS provider or a cloud provider to your internal development teams, and therefore you want to make sure that the platform is up and running. And like the deployment is an interesting one, right? Like how long does it take to deploy maybe an updates, and how stable are these systems that are running on there? Or I guess how fast can they deploy? That's good metrics. And why do you think this didn't work? Because you said it didn't quite catch on.
I think it was a lack of, in that case, and a lack of experience within our little SRE team, which is literally at the moment, it was 2 engineers at that time, and understanding the follow through. You know what I mean? We didn't talk about, we did embed with them, and my colleague actually did operations with that team for 3 months just to learn what they do. But we didn't adjust that operational process at all. And that was what was missing, right? We have this SLO now. Let's start focusing on that and maybe stop alerting on the 400,000 other things that we're currently panicking about all the time. Maybe. I don't know. Maybe you know more about how to transition into SLOs if you have a huge backlog of technical alerts and metrics.
Yeah. I mean, for me, the question would be, again, focusing on this team. Let's assume you focused on the number of deployments or how fast you can deploy. Is this a number the team came up themselves, or did they also say, hey, we actually confirmed this as a requirement from our internal customers, and they are actually not happy if we cannot deliver? So I think coming up with an SLO that for me makes sense as a software producer or service producer is great. But if my customers actually don't care about this, then why should I care about it? So my question would be, A, have you monitored it? B, have you promoted this number also to the other teams that were using the Kubernetes platform so that they can actually see how successful that platform is and how things have changed over time? Because if the customers start caring, and if they think this is actually a good number or a good SLO, then I think it becomes a different thing. Then you also, as a platform provider, become more responsible, or like you feel more. I think it then actually makes more sense, because you then actually see that you have an impact, or that you have a negative impact on those internal customers if you don't meet your goals. And because this is sometimes what I've seen, we come up with SLOs just for the sake to have SLOs, but in the end, we don't care if we don't meet them, because it doesn't have any impact if we don't meet them. Right, and I think this is the big challenge. Just creating SLOs, and I think it was not you, maybe it was somebody else. I had a heated discussion, and he said, Andy, don't go around in the world and tell everybody they have to define SLOs for every service. This is bullshit, because the SLOs is not about defining SLOs for every service. And I said, you're right. Because really what you need to do is you need to define SLOs where it really matters, and where it really matters is the end user. And the end user might be an end user that uses your services, or it might be an internal team that tries to deploy their apps on the platform, and then they're expecting a certain level of service. But just coming up with artificial numbers doesn't help anybody.
I fully agree with you there. I think that's a mistake that we made. We was internally developed within that platform, the team who ran the PaaS, right? We should have had representatives of our internal customers to bounce these ideas off and say, hey, this is what we're doing. What matters to you?
Yeah.
And that's actually one of, you go?
Yeah. And maybe one additional thing, because in the platform team, it could be interesting. You could say, hey, we are the IAG platform team. We provide you Kubernetes as a service. You can go with us, and we provide you this type of availability and this type of speed. If you don't like this, you can go to AWS, Google, or Amazon, but we don't want to, because we believe we provide a better service for you. And I think this is also, I think you then need to kind of try to figure out who is the competition, right? Because if there's no competition, if the mandate is you can only use that platform, then there's also less pressure on you. And I think that
there pretty much is no competition, because the reason it was built is it's an insurance company, very sensitive about where data goes. It's a huge process to get a cloud service approved and working. And even, especially if there's customer information involved, which there absolutely is with the systems hosted on this. So there's very little competition for this particular platform. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cool. But then you said you came up with prerequisites, right? So that means like you learned things that don't work well, or tried and it didn't succeed, but now you have prerequisites. What are these? Do you want to share with us?
Sure. I will say just before that there was a third encounter where I've been asked to help develop SLOs, and that focus was, hey, we've got a gigantic, massive, complex program of work. We're currently doing all these non-functional requirements around performance and reliability, and we tick a bunch of boxes before we go live. Can we move to SLOs? And I thought initially, that's great. And then as I started unraveling the complexity of the program, I thought, wow, this is going to be really difficult for a number of reasons. And that's where I came up with the prerequisites that I'm going to talk about today. So I think the first prerequisite, and it's probably not a surprise, is there needs to be a certain level of observability in place. It's pretty obvious, right? If you can't see and measure the reliability of what's there now, and if you can't track the status of your SLOs after the fact, then you can't really do much for that, right?
Flying blind and just gut feelings, yeah.
The second is, I think teams need they need additional time and space set aside. So in the context of this program, there's a lot of focus on delivering features. The teams I've talked to are under the pump. They're like, I said, how busy are you? One team said 12 out of 10. I'm like, okay, well, how are you supposed to engage with this culture change if you don't have sufficient time and mental space, right? The third prerequisite I've been thinking about is just valuing reliability, or actually just valuing quality in general in the wider sense. So if you just focus on we've got to get these features over the line, and that is the most important thing, then what's going to give? If you have to get something done by a deadline, what's the thing that's going to give? It's going to be the quality of what you're delivering, right? And I had a thought recently about that. I think in a really large organization like a cloud provider, that it's a no-brainer that the reliability of the services and the customer experience is paramount. I totally 100% back that. But I think perhaps maybe in the realm of smaller organizations, it might actually be that the bigger value is to improve the lives of the staff who operate the software and the cost of maintaining or operating unreliable software, if that makes sense. That's a subtle difference.
Mm-hmm. It does make a lot of because if I understand this correctly, in a smaller organization you have fewer resources, and therefore you need to focus on reliability and efficiency right from the start, because otherwise you're just burning the few amount of resources you have for these kind of working constantly on technical debt versus innovation. And I think in general, cost and efficiency and sustainability should be topic for big and small organizations. But I think for very large organizations that have a lot of staff or like more resources and even maybe more money in the bank that they can survive for a little longer, it's easier to be a little less efficient and still make it over the next quarter or something like this. That's a good one. A couple of thoughts here, because I remember going back to the LinkedIn posting, this was exactly one of the arguments you actually made, because you said, why do you talk about SLOs? For you, it should be about reliability. And I then said, well, for me, SLOs are a measure of reliability, because if I have an SLO on availability, it means my system needs to be reliable in order to be available. And if I have an SLO on performance, my system has to be reliable, because otherwise I cannot deliver the performance under different factors of load. But I want to say something to the cost, because this week I had several conversations with our customers as I was traveling through Germany, and we all know that we have a big energy crisis here, at least. I'm sure in all of the world, but in Europe we feel it quite a lot. We're spending too much money on inefficient things, and now everybody's like, sustainability and cost efficiency is a big topic. And I really had conversations with organizations this week about defining SLOs on costs, cost per feature, cost per app, cost per service, and actually drive it down, because people realize that as we moved to the cloud, everything seemed like endless scale, and we didn't have enough focus on the costs. And now people are realizing that we're wasting a lot of not only money, but a lot of power, and we don't have endless energy here. And that's why I think every company wants to be more green, more sustainable. And we also discussed about, can we use SLOs as a vehicle to, in the end, reach our performance, our reliability goal, but also bring down our costs. And I think we're all performance engineers. If you solve performance, if you have performance hotspots in your apps, if you can fix a CPU intensive algorithm, it not only makes your system more performant, but also more efficient. And that's also an important aspect.
So you're talking about like multi-dimensional SLOs, so not just my feature can complete within 2 seconds, but my feature completes within 2 seconds and I don't need 24 cores to run it. Because
exactly.
of course you might be able to get something up to speed with enough power, but what you're saying is you also need to get that power done, and you can't use brute force to get it through, because that's going to be the cost of the energy, just even the dollar cost of the cloud.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So basically,
we've talked about this in the past a little bit, right? Yeah.
Yeah. What we talked about is what's the euro amount of a particular feature for a particular user base.
Yeah.
And then measuring this over time and see how it behaves, and also that not only how it changes over time, but that you set certain goals that you need to keep it under a certain level, unless you make a strategic decision that you're packing additional features into a certain user journey, and therefore you may accept an increase by 10 cents per transaction or something like this. Yeah.
I wonder if we need to come up with a new term, the efficiency level objective, or ELO for short, and then we could all start singing Electric Light Orchestra songs. It'd be just a wonderful day for everyone.
Yeah.
But there's that efficiency factor, not just the performance. I don't know.
Another slight variation on that is that I think that in a company like IAG where I work for, it's not the P1 and P2 incidents which kill us. It's the thousands of P3s and P4s that. So I think having a focus on let's understand those, let's bring them down, let's build automation, let's simplify, let's make things more reliable and robust, and let's build a culture where we know how to deal, accept failure and learn from it as well. It's something I'm excited by, and I think it's been a sort of click in my head in the last week, actually. Okay, this is an area that has real value where I am right now.
I think that applies to a lot of things too. I mean, if you think about, the death by 1,000 cuts concept is what you're talking about with those P3s. And I remember a few years ago going back trying to figure out how can I decrease my monthly spend on bills, right? And I was looking for that P1 that would save me a ton of money. Because I'd look at like my cable bill, like I can only cut $15 from that and $10 here, and then it finally dawned on me, if I do all of those, now suddenly they add up together. It's such a simple concept that gets overlooked often. So I think that's a great thing to remind people your idea of like, look at those P3s. How much damage are those doing in total?
But in order to scale, you need automation, right? Because you cannot put 1,000 people on 1,000 P3s. And that's where the automation comes in, and better observability with better, context information. Stephen, you had 3 prerequisites so far, and you mentioned earlier 3 additional ones. Might be somewhere
I've
in
got
the back
6
of
to
your
go.
mind.
I've got 6 to go. Okay, and let's move on. All right, so ownership and autonomy. I think if teams don't have the ownership of their own service level and the autonomy to adjust it themselves, that kind of defeats the purpose of SLOs, I think. If you have an external party saying, these are your targets, then it's not an SLO. It's, I don't know, something else, an SLA.
Just
or
the contractual obligation,
Yeah, something different.
Yeah.
And related to that, business and technology stakeholders embedded and working together, a representative for the customers there in the team. If you don't have that, then how can you independently develop SLOs without going to some external parties and bringing them in, which might work, but it's just more complicated. And the last of my original 6, blameless culture and psychological safety. So it's funny that since joining SRE and hearing conferences, these things are talked about a lot more than I expected. Because obviously SLOs are kind of messy and tricky, and it's getting a lot of people to talk about scary new things at times. And that requires experimentation, the right mindset, the ability to what's it called? The opposite of fear of failure.
Joy and success. I don't know.
The ability to fail and be like, that's okay. Because from my experience, if you try and adopt SLOs for the first time, you're going to fail continually. And I think it's how you respond to those failures, which is going to be make or break.
It's funny that that's not just a given yet, right? I mean, that goes back forever. I mean, not just in modern computing in terms of if you fail properly, fail fast, fail often, right, and improve. But if you go back, like the great story about how Post-it notes were created, right? I'm sure you've all heard that story, and if you haven't, it was an accident. Like those Post-it notes, the guy was trying to create a super glue, messed it up, and then he found these were sticking and he could take them off. They're like, oh wow, this is pretty awesome, right? But even, at least over here in the United States, we had this thing called Bell Labs, which was like this legendary place of invention, where they would just take all these smart people, toss them in, and they'd say, play. Right. And they were just screwing around, trying out all this stuff. Like a lot of the stuff never worked, but then suddenly they'd finally hit something. The fact that failure has to be embraced still, or has to be taught to be embraced, it just boggles my mind.
Who made the quote where he said, I didn't fail 1,000 times. I just found 1,000 ways that don't work. I haven't yet found the one way that works.
I don't know who said that, but yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Cool.
So I had 3 new ones though, right?
No, I just want a quick comment. I'm completely with you on all of these 3, and I just want to add ownership and autonomy is. I typically talk only about ownership because for me, ownership is important because otherwise, as I said, if you measure something and nobody cares, then why do you even do it? I like the autonomy addition to it, the autonomy to adjust because you know how things change and having the autonomy to set your own goals. I also completely agree with business and technology. So every time when I try to run workshops now, I don't want the technical team to come to me and say, let's do SLOs. I said, we also need the business stakeholders, because in the end, they need to tell us what is the business objective. And then from that business objective, we need to break it down into technical objectives so that we can always align every objective to the top business goal. And for blameless culture, I think, Brian, we had a couple of episodes recently around also chaos engineering, and we had Anna Medina on the call, and she also talked about this. And we had her name escapes my mind, but we had a couple of episodes where we talked about blameless culture, especially in the context of chaos engineering and kind of building resilient systems and doing game days and stuff like this, and how the organization deals with failure. Yeah. Cool.
All right. My three new prerequisites I've thought about.
Insert drum roll here. It's almost like the Dave Letterman top 10.
The first one you actually just touched on, I think, is having clear business objectives, because everything flows from that. Mm-hmm. And if you just go in and say, let's do SLOs, like we said in the beginning, you're not going to get anywhere that's aligned to where you want to go. Right? I had an aha moment recently. That was my last podcast episode, where I talked to business leaders and they said, we want to do these things in the next 5 years. We want to grow this many customers, and we want to reduce our operational costs by this much. And here's some ways we think we can do that. I was like, wow, I've never heard that before. That is incredible. How empowering. Yeah. Mm-hmm. The third one, and I'm still formulating this, I think that there are having the right team structure or architectural simplicity, because those are linked because of Conway's law. Having the right architecture makes it easier. So having, for example, a decoupled architecture where components can independently be treated almost like an individual product is great. And when things are tightly coupled together, it just makes it harder to rationalize, okay, to do the SLO, we kind of need to get these teams talking together and working together, and then communication overload kicks in, and it makes it harder, I think. So I'm curious about your thoughts on that.
I agree with you. I mean, there's also have you heard about the book Team Topologies? I think it's basically, I think that the idea is here that you have, as you said, right, clear structures on like kind of what is the platform team. Like in your organization, you have a platform team that is building platform services, and then you have individual kind of value creation teams on top, and you want to make sure that these are independent enough and they have clear contracts to any other teams that they are depending on. But then you have like contractual and nice interfaces. From a technical side, you have interfaces, and from a team to team perspective, right, you can basically then agree on the contract on what this team provides and what the other team provides. And then on these interfaces or contracts, you can then, where it makes sense, also define SLOs, but then they can work independently as long as they don't break the contracts. Definitely. There's nothing I can add to this, even though it's easier said than done.
The only thing I would add to that in terms of what should go into the thought behind it, like I think the concept is there completely, but when teams are considering how are you going to design this to be decoupled, what technology are we going to use, one thing that I've actually just had a fun conversation with one of our customers about it is that you also have to think about, if we choose technology X, are we going to be able to observe it, and are we going to observe the components of it that we need? Because quite often what we find is people pick something, they get it running and all, and they're like, oh, now we need to start measuring it and all this, and it's something that's extremely difficult to do. Or it's either going to be a full-on homegrown DIY thing that they're going to spend a lot of time and resources, or if they take an off-the-shelf product, there's certain success or certain capabilities that are there, but it wasn't part of that thought process going into it. So not only do you have to think about the decoupling and that independence and ability to manipulate those different pieces, just make it run on its own, but add into that, observability side of it, and even security. How are we going to do this and keep it secure too? So pulling that whole suite into that decision making and that approach going into it.
I have a feeling that perhaps the best situation to define SLOs would be if you have long-lived feature teams who can independently deliver features completely to customers, from top to bottom. That's not the situation where I am now. We have more component-based teams. Mm-hmm. That's the feeling that I have, but I haven't actually got the experience to say yes, that works.
Mm-hmm. I have a problem now. I only took 9 bullet points and only wrote down 8 of your prerequisites, but not 9. What did I miss?
Let's do the 10. We have one more, or
one more. I've got one more to go.
Yeah.
You got one more to go. Okay, I thought you already. That's why. Okay, I thought I missed one because I know it's getting late and it was a long day. But number 9.
Okay, very last
number
one.
9.
It's very simple. Having education, having a shared understanding, shared terminology of what SLOs and SLIs are, why they're helpful, and what the ultimate outcome is. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I will probably put number 9 almost at the top. Right? I think before you have any discussion on the SLOs, this is what I try to do now as well. I want to educate people on the terminology and why we're doing this, because if you just throw them into a workshop and say we need to define SLOs, and then we have a different understanding on what is availability, what is an error rate, what is XYZ, then I think you end up maybe with a result, but everybody has a different understanding on what that result actually is, and therefore education is key.
Our team is currently right now trying to think of a way that we can create like an SLO hub within the company, which anyone can go to learn about it. But we want to make it actually really simple and visual and fun. So if you've got any ideas for that, let me know.
Well, I know
to come up
somebody.
With an interesting character.
Exactly. I know somebody that is using, I think, Paint for his arts. And who would that be, right? I know somebody that has a YouTube channel, even though he says it's just a podcast, but I think he's very talented with educating people in a fun way. So
we want to make it we don't productize it, so it's not tied to my MS Paint ability to, I can only draw so many pictures at a time. But you know how that came about is that I wanted to create the YouTube channel, and even for blog posts I wanted artwork, and my wife's really good at that kind of thing, and she was always too busy. So I said, I need independence. I can't draw. MS Paint it is, and that's how it all started.
Wow.
Yeah. Brian, you haven't seen his artwork? You should.
No, I got to go check it out. I love that all.
Yeah.
One thing I was going to ask about, and I don't know if this would be a prerequisite or if it fits in somewhere else, and maybe what I'm going to suggest here is completely wrong, but when you mentioned right at the beginning the idea that first team you worked with, they were more the Kubernetes infrastructure, and they had to focus on their customer, which is the people using the infrastructure, the Kubernetes platform, not the actual customers. That got me thinking that your SLO should be something within your control that has a direct impact on your customers and not beyond it, because anything beyond that you don't have control over, right? That Kubernetes team can't directly influence the end customer, so they shouldn't be defining SLOs for that. They're by trade-off of time spent and time spent adding up, yes, that's going to influence the end customer, but it's really more downstream teams that are going to influence that customer. So they should focus, let's say, on their immediate customers. So should SLOs be really focused on your direct customers and only things that you have control over? And I don't know if that can be a blanket statement at all, or is that being too broad in general? And is that prerequisite, or is that just part of the concept behind everything?
I think it's spot on, because think about if I go to Amazon, they give me a certain SLO and SLA on their services, but they cannot guarantee that the app that I deploy on the infrastructure is fast, because that depends on how I write my app. I could never make AWS responsible for how good or bad I write my code.
Right.
What they can do though, and I think this is also, I guess, Stephen, what your team does, they can give recommendations, right? That's why they have the, what are they calling it? The well-defined architecture. So they have like templates on, if you want to build apps that run efficiently on our platform, here are some templates, here are some architectural patterns. If you follow them, the chances of becoming successful and efficient is higher. But yeah, that's the way I see it.
I agree as well.
It's also like one of the customers I visited yesterday, they also didn't call it a platform team, it was kind of like the delivery enablement team. They were basically providing different templates of pipelines. and different templates of deployment definitions for microservices that they give to their internal customers, which are the development teams, right? And they said, hey, if you use these pipeline template like Jenkins, then we give you these 5 steps. And if you enable step 1, 2, 3, 4, then you get automated observability, you get automated testing, and then you get automated deployment, right? So this is the template. We suggest you use it, but if you want to do your own way, then it's up to you. But if you do this, our platform is optimized for that. And that's the...
So here's a sort of conceptual challenge we were having recently is the current solution that I know about that we were going to do SLOs for. There might be one customer interaction, and that hits components who are owned by 10 different teams. And the question is always, who has ownership for the end customer? And well, maybe it's the digital front end team who look after that web UI. Maybe it's them, but then they need to now collaborate with 9 other different teams. And it was just hard to conceptualize. I haven't come up with a solution I'm happy with to make that all work.
What I've seen, with the end customer, you typically either have, let's say, a mobile app or a web app or something, and whoever owns that interface, I think, is the one that should have the ownership of how many people are using this particular app or feature, what is the user experience we expect, and if their front end depends on key backend components, they then need to basically break down, in order to deliver a certain user experience on the top, what do we need from service A, B, and C? What type of level of service do we need in order to fulfill our goal? And then it almost becomes like I need this from you, and if I don't get this from you, right, in the open market world, I would go to somebody else. Like maybe I don't take the authentication service from us internally, but I go with a public SaaS service, right, because they can deliver it. And so that's what I've done in some of my workshops, where I start with a top level goal on individual user journeys, like opening up a mobile app and logging in, then making a transfer for a mobile financial app, and then I say, this is kind of what they want on the front end, which backend services are directly involved, and what is kind of their contribution to it, what's kind of their performance budget or their reliability budget, what is their SLO that they need, that I need them to deliver to me in order for me to fulfill my top level goal.
While you were saying that, I was thinking about, have you ever heard of an organization where you have almost like an internal marketplace where maybe 2 or 3 different teams are all developing the same thing, and you get that sense of competition and driving for excellence?
Yeah, I never had this before, but I think this is the ideal world, but this would definitely result into most likely more efficient and better reliable software, because then you're competing, because you wanna be the service that is used, and not right? You want people to stay with you and not go to the other cloud vendors. They should go to your platform team and not to AWS or Google or Microsoft.
Very interesting.
I understand it's tough if you don't have the choice of having multiple services, if you are constrained, but then you need to have other things like, we need, I'm sure there's some type of competition in your world. People can decide to not go with IAG, but with other organizations. And then that's the business driver, right? That's how many we need to make people happy, and happy means they need to have a good digital experience with our organization. How do we achieve this? Yeah. Good. Brian, I know we both have a kind of a hard stop in a couple of minutes. So we probably need to wrap it up.
I think so. I think this was fascinating, Stephen. I thank you for sharing it so much. Was there, before we do, was there any other point you were hoping to, dying, to get out on here? You're starring in a new movie and you're coming on to the late night show to talk about it, that you didn't get it in?
Yeah, I'm hosting MS PaintCon.
I'm going to give you a challenge. So for anybody listening to it, we'll see if you made the challenge. I'm looking at your pictures right now. Andy, can you send this episode won't air until the 26th of July. If I don't want to put pressure on you, but if you can send that picture you took, Andy, over to Stephen, if you could do a rendition, your style in MS Paint, we'll use that for the image for the podcast. If not, totally understand. You got other real work to get done in your own stuff or your bit. but it would be a fantastic honor to have one of your original pieces of art to use on for the show.
It would be a genuine pleasure. I would love to do that.
Yeah. Awesome. And would this then be an NFR and we can sell it for a really high price?
No, we're not going to get involved in any of that kind of...
No.
Don't get me going on those.
Same.
Anyhow, awesome. Really appreciate you coming on today. Andy, did you have anything you wanted to wrap with, or?
No, I should have said this in the beginning because we are connecting 3 different continents today.
Yeah.
New Zealand, the US, and Europe. Thanks to technology,
those are countries, by the way.
Today, and huh?
Well, you said US. You said continents, and you kind of did a mix between.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
I don't even know what that is.
I know.
It's late in the day for you.
But what I wanted to say is the technology that we use today was really resilient. It worked perfectly. For me, it met all the SLOs. And thank you so much, Stephen. Hopefully, this is not the last show that we do together, because I know all of us, we constantly learn. And we're also those that constantly like to share the learnings. And therefore, I hope we have you back at a future episode.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much, Andy and Brian. I had a great conversation and I learned a few things. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks a lot. And thanks to all of our listeners for listening to this episode. If you have any questions or comments, you can tweet us at, what's our Twitter? I don't even
Pure underscore.
Yeah, it is pure_DT, right? Yeah.
T, exactly.
All right. Or you can send us an email at pureperformance@dynatrace.com. But thanks for listening, everyone. And again, big thank you for Stephen for joining us. And look forward to talking to you in the future. Thanks a lot, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.